So, good afternoon, Sweden and Europe, and good morning, New York. And welcome to this event organized by Nasdaq and the Swedish House of Finance at the Stockholm School of Economics. My name is Gabriel Örwitz, and I'm the chair of the Swedish House of Finance. For those of you who do not know Swedish House of Finance, we are Sweden's national research center in financial economics and aim to be an independent platform where academia, the private and public financial sectors can meet to exchange knowledge and foster new ideas within the field of finance. We are here today to talk about how companies are working with diversity, gender and minority issues to become successful. As a side comment, I was brought up by my late mother who attended the Stockholm School of Economics in 1943 to 1946. I think there were 6 or 7 women in her class. So I've experienced close by the gender issue. We are happy, very happy to start the conversation with a fireside chat with Adina Friedman, President and CEO of Nasdaq, moderated by Fredericks, President, Nasdaq Stockholm. Following the fireside chat, we will have a roundtable discussion, but I will come back to that. So please, the floor is yours, Adina and Fredrik.
Thank you very much, Gabriel, and thank you very much, Swedish House of Finance, for co-hosting this event with us. Good morning, Adina. How are you?
I'm fine. How are you, Frederick? It's great to see you.
Good. Would you mind telling us a little bit on your background and your Nasdaq journey before we dive into the topic of diversity?
Sure. Well, I grew up in a city called Baltimore in Maryland in the US, and I ended up at Nasdaq right after I graduated from business school as an intern. And then I was able to parlay that into a permanent job at the end of the summer. And I've been at Nasdaq almost my entire career. So I started there in 1993. Nasdaq at the time was still kind of a budding US exchange, equities exchange. And then I had various roles throughout the organization, ultimately leading the data business as well as becoming head of corporate strategy and then CFO. I left for 3 years and went to the Carlyle Group as their CFO and when they went public. And then I came back to Nasdaq in 2014 as president. And then ultimately in 2017, I was named CEO. So it's been a wonderful opportunity for me to be at an organization that has challenged me and given me opportunities throughout my career, but it's also just a great company. And I think we have a great mission. So happy to be here today.
Great. I think here in Sweden, thinking about Nasdaq is mainly as an exchange operator of the Stockholm Stock Exchange and some other exchanges in the Nordics, but also, of course, the US exchange. But I mean, Nasdaq has transformed during these 50 years that have been active, and especially during your journey. So how would you describe Nasdaq today as a company?
Sure. Well, today, Nasdaq is a global technology company that serves the capital markets. We are an exchange operator in the US and in the Nordics, and we're extremely proud of that foundation. But we also now, because actually of our acquisition of OMX and all the work that OMX did before we acquired them, we are now a very large-scaled technology provider to 130 other markets around the world. We also have a very large index business with about $350 billion of assets under management tied to our index products. And we also have a data and analytics business that serves the investment management community with really important intelligence to help them attract assets to their funds and provide competitive analysis. So I feel that we are a scaled technology provider, but we always remember that our foundation is our exchanges, and we're extremely proud of the work that we do as an exchange operator in the Nordics as well as in the US.
Thanks. Now the warm up is done, Adina. Now we're going to the more tougher question. So diving into the topic a little bit, ESG is of high focus in the society and the financial market, and that is very good. And it ranges all the way from sustainable investment, social impact, and corporate governance. And within that umbrella, you also have diversity and gender equality. But why is this important for you and for Nasdaq?
Well, I think first of all, I do want to say we are extremely fortunate that we are a part of the Nordic markets because of the fact, and the Nordics really have led the world in ESG investing and a focus on sustainability. It's really embedded in the culture of the Nordics to be very, very mindful of our impact on the world. And I think that part of our culture has really emanated throughout NASDAQ. And we're very fortunate, honestly, to have that as part of our culture, because then we've been able to focus on issues of ESG, I think, earlier than other exchanges. I think that the why it's important, of course, is that we all have to recognize that the corporate world and the public sector have to work together to create a sustainable economy for the global economy. And we also have to recognize that we don't exist to meet the numbers for the next quarter. We exist to make an impact on the world over a long period of time. And we can make a positive impact, or we can make a negative impact. And I think that I think many corporates in Europe and the US now have come to a full recognition that part of our role is to make a positive impact. And I think that what's been great about the ESG movement is that it's become quite mature in Europe, but it has kind of come, because of all of the maturity in Europe, it's kind of come roaring into the US as well. And US has played a very fast catch up to the need for companies to focus on all stakeholders as part of their role. As well, so, and I always say it's an and, not an or. Focus on your shareholders, but focus on other aspects of your community, your employees, your suppliers, your clients. If you do all of that, obviously you will end up providing the right long-term outcome for your shareholders. So I think it's just it's an obvious area of focus for us, but it's become an area of focus for all of the corporates in the US and Europe, and it's a very important movement.
So if we zoom in a little bit on diversity and gender equality, what are some of the actions and initiatives that NASDAQ has ongoing within this space?
Well, if we take a step back and say, why does diversity matter in the world of corporates? I think it's an obvious answer, but at the same time, it's still an education in some sectors. So the obvious answer is, of course, that our customers are diverse. And so if we do the right job of serving our customers, then we will obviously have long-term success as a business. Now, how do you make sure that you're serving a diverse set of customers is to make sure your company, inside the company, you have proper diversity so that you get those different points of view, you get an understanding of the people you're serving. And those employees can really help drive the company forward to be able to serve those diverse clients. I think that also, of course, if we want to have sustainable capitalism over the long term, we have to make sure that capitalism works for all of society and not just some of society. And so we have been focused on something we call cooperative capitalism, which is really making sure that we have the best of capitalism. Companies can be extremely nimble in serving clients. The government has large issues and problems and opportunities to solve. So how can companies work with the government to really further the economy and further society together? And if we can do that successfully, I feel like we can have a very sustainable capitalist society. But a large part of that is making sure that opportunity is available to all and not just to some. So that's kind of, to me, the foundation of why diversity matters inside of companies and matters in terms of how companies are being led. And therefore, NASDAQ, one of the initiatives that we have in the US is a diversity proposal that's focused on the disclosure of the diversity of corporate boards. So every company, our proposal is that every company that lists on NASDAQ would be required annually to provide a table to their investors that demonstrates the diversity of their board members. And then also we've set an objective that over the next 4 years, we're asking our companies to reach 2 diverse board members within their organizations. But if they don't reach that objective, their only obligation is to explain to shareholders why they haven't been able to reach it, or maybe they just don't agree with that objective. So they can also explain it that way. So we call that a have or explain rule. And so it's really trying to move and encourage companies to move forward in having their board look more like their employees, look more like their clients, and at the same time not doing it with a hard quota. So that's the US initiative. I think in Europe and Sweden and in many Nordic countries, there's been more progress on this issue than there has been in the US. And Frederick, maybe you could actually provide, we were talking about what's happened in Sweden and kind of where have we gotten in Sweden on the gender diversity of boards. And maybe you could provide a little bit of insight on that.
Yes, if we look into the gender equality over like a 10-year period, I think we have had good development in terms of the Swedish market and corporate, but it has become slower. And actually, when we looked at the report for 2020, it was even reversed in some areas. So we felt like we needed to put focus on this again. We need to continue with education and help corporates in their journey on this progress. So we partnered with an expert organization called Allbright and also with the Swedish Venture Capital Association to provide a platform for education around gender equality and diversity. And we will actually have the first educational session already now in March. And then we hope to have 4 or 5 educational sessions this year, evaluate and move forward and hopefully move the needle and get more progress also in the area of the Nordics, because it has slowed down and we want to get momentum back.
But it's interesting, Frederick, I think that's terrific. I think that what's interesting to me is that the Swedish government worked with the exchange to come out with a standard of disclosure plus encouragement is what I would call it, like kind of setting a goal for the country to reach, I think, 40% representation of women. And I think when they set that goal, it was at about 24% representation. And I believe that in Sweden, it's gotten to 34% over the period. Is that right?
Yeah, so it was through the governance code that we have. We have this traditional self-regulation and the governance code, and in that there were these targets. And you're right, we are at around 34, 35%, but it's slowing down a little bit. And I actually think that by now we would have hoped to reach the target of the 40%. So I think it's time to see if we can get some more momentum into this.
And what I really like about the approach that Sweden has taken is that they've done it through a disclosure regime and then encouragement and these setting goals and targets to try to encourage companies to really focus on it and make it a part of their governance practices, but not having it be a hard quota. And I think there has been progress, but I agree it has been slowing down. And so if there can be this renewed focus on it, I think that 40% is quite attainable. And of course, it's always important to remember that women comprise at least half of the population. So to get to 40% isn't quite parity, but it's a really long way. The U.S. is much further behind on that. So I think that we have an opportunity in the U.S. to kind of take the lessons of Sweden and try to apply them through the Nasdaq proposal.
And I think when we announced our partnership with Allbright and the Swedish Capital Venture Association, that generated positive feedback all the time. Of course, it's a very good topic. But when you proposed in the US, how was the reaction of the community with your board diversity proposal?
Well, so the way that it works in the US is when we want to change a listing rule, we propose it to the SEC, which is the equivalent of the FSA in the US. And the SEC then has to approve it. So it goes out, what happens is we submit the proposal and it goes out for comments. We then submit a response to all of those comments and any amendments that we want to make. And then it goes out for comment again if we've made amendments. We are at the end of the first comment period, and we have gotten over 200, or actually 190 comments. 83% of them are positive. 17% of them are negative. Some of the negative comments are that we're not going far enough, and others are that this is not what certain people want to see us doing. But in the media, it's been a different issue. So you've seen certain media outlets be quite negative on the proposal, and other media outlets really stand up and be very positive towards the proposal. So there's been more of a polarized, I would say, coverage of the proposal in the media. But when you really look at the comments are overwhelmingly positive. And most of those comments are coming from the investment management community because investors want standardized data and they want to encourage companies towards more diversity. And this proposal does both of those things in a way that they agree is a good market-led solution instead of a government-led solution. So I have to say, I think it's been an interesting reaction, we did expect a debate, but the media attention has been more polarized than we expected.
Okay, it's going to be very interesting to follow this. In addition to the board diversity initiative, Nasdaq has something called the Purpose Initiative. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. Well, the Purpose Initiative, I mean, kind of the Board Diversity Initiative in a way is tied to the purpose of Nasdaq. So Nasdaq's purpose is to drive inclusive growth and prosperity. And I think it's important to recognize the word inclusive, because I think, as I said before, the best way for the US to create a sustainable capitalist society is to make sure that we are focused on giving more opportunity to more people. And so as part of our purpose initiative is really to, what I would say, activate our purpose, both within the businesses and making sure that as we drive our businesses forward, we're thinking about our purpose and we're staying focused on that purpose as being a market operator and a technology provider. And so, for instance, of course, our job, as you know, very well know, Frederick, is we want to maximize access and minimize friction within the markets, because we want to democratize the capital markets and make investing available to everyone. And if we can do that and make it so that more and more of our communities are equity owners and are invested in the future of commerce, I think that we'll find that more of them get lifted up over time, particularly over the long term, and it's a wealth creation event for everyone. But so one of the things we've done is we are focused on financial literacy and investment education, and we're really trying to figure out through the foundation how we bring that to more underserved communities. And then also we have the Entrepreneur Center, which we've now taken into a global online application where it's free education for entrepreneurs all over the world, to allow them to understand how to grow and create a sustainable business that hopefully one day they take to the public markets.
And would you say in general that this sort of corporate purpose has become more important for a corporate's long-term success?
Oh, definitely. I would say, there are many companies that have been purpose-driven for a long time, and we have been purpose-driven for a very long time. I think, though, that there's a lot more attention being drawn to those companies that really are walking the talk, is probably the right way to say it. It's one thing to say that you're purpose-driven. It's another thing to demonstrate that you're purpose-driven. So I think investors are holding companies to a higher standard today of what are they doing to demonstrate that their purpose is true and that they're staying true to their purpose. And I think that the companies are getting rewarded when they can demonstrate that they have a very strong purpose, that it's driving their long-term strategy, and that they're demonstrating the purpose every day in the way that they operate the business. And you're seeing money flow to those companies that can really show that on an everyday basis. So while I think there's always been a lot of purpose behind many corporates, I think the investor attention towards purpose has been highly elevated through the ESG movement. And I do think it's a sustainable part of what corporates should focus on in the future.
And in terms of sort of equality and diversity, what would you say has changed the most during your career within the financial market?
Yeah, well, I can speak from my own experience as a woman in the industry, but I have to say, I think that we've made a lot of progress for women in the financial industry. I think that we have a long way to go in terms of really creating an inclusive culture for people from all diverse backgrounds. I think that we're much further behind in the way that we are attracting and retaining talent from every diverse background. But as a woman in the industry, I have to say I've had a great career at Nasdaq and at Carlyle. I've never felt held back from my ambitions ever. I've actually been propelled forward in a couple of cases that people took risks on me, and I really appreciated that, and I worked very hard to prove that they were right. But I also would say that not every woman in the industry has had the experience I've had, and not every company is like Nasdaq. So the thing that I've seen that's been really interesting over, think about it as 30 years. So back in the 80s, the financial industry had, it was very clear that there was some really bad behavior in the industry. And it came to light, and it got a lot of, like, a spotlight was shined on the challenges that women had in the industry. And so I would say that at that point, CEOs started to say, well, we have to put in policies and practices that curb this behavior and start to move the companies forward. And so I'd say that that was in the CEO's head, but it wasn't in their heart yet. When we, in the 90s, you started to see women have more opportunity, get further up in the chain, but it was just starting. And then as the next generation of leaders came into the industry, you started to see it go from the head to the heart. And once that happens, then it's not just a matter of policies and practices, it really becomes a matter of culture. And I think that I have seen leaders in the industry work very hard to really shape their culture to give more women more opportunities and to make it so that women can get to the top. So we now in the US have a woman running one of the largest banks in the world. She actually starts, I think, next week, Jane Fraser. But we also see a whole range of women right below the CEO ranks running major parts of the industry. So it's pretty exciting to see how much change, but recognize that's 30 years I'm talking about. Change doesn't happen overnight. So our next step is obviously to continue that progress and to make sure that that equal opportunity truly becomes equal, but also to really focus now on other elements of diversity and to make sure that we make those same shifts to make it so everyone in the community feels that our industry is a place that they can thrive.
Thank you. And to finalize this chat a little bit, 2020 was a very special year and challenging year for many individuals and corporates. I mean, as a global leader for a company that exists in all parts of the world, I mean, what is your biggest sort of challenge and focus area going into 2021 now, when we're still impacted by the pandemic?
It was a very interesting year, 2020. The challenges that we experienced within the company, just in terms of keeping all of our employees safe while still running our markets in the most heightened volume environment that we've seen ever, as well as making sure that our other exchange clients continue to get the support that they needed to be able to run their markets and to continue to have a positive culture, a positive spirit within the firm. It's been a really challenging year, but one that I feel very proud of the fact that Nasdaq all over the world, both in the US and in the Nordics, as well as in our global operations, have continued to serve our clients very well and operate the markets well, while moving everyone to a remote environment. But 2021 is going to be a different challenge. We're already in that world now, and it's a long winter, as we know. But as we emerge into the spring, people are going to want to get back together. You've also got the vaccine starting to roll out. So the question is, when are we going to be able to reemerge and reconvene and get together again and kind of have a sense of normalcy? Is it going to be the summer? Is it going to be the fall? But let's say that it's the second half of this year. What does that mean for the future of work? We have people now who enjoy working from home, other people who can't wait to get back. So how do we create the proper hybrid environment and maintain this cultural spirit that we're trying to maintain, and hopefully introduce more flexibility into the workplace? I'm actually excited to offer more flexibility, because I actually think that the flexibility is going to make it so that more women have more opportunity throughout their careers, and they're going to feel less strained and stressed during those really challenging years of having the kids at home. So I'm really hopeful that we can come out stronger and offer more opportunity to more people with a hybrid model going forward.
Thank you, Adina, and thank you very much for prioritizing this discussion this morning. To be honest, it's a little bit scary interviewing your own CEO, but I think we did fine, and I
did a great. No, it was awesome.
So with that, we have a great panel following this. So thank you very much again, Adina, and I'll leave it back to you, Gabriel.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you very much, Adina and Frederick. And Adina, we really appreciate your participation. So thank you very much. It was very interesting to listen to both of you. Now we move on to the panel. We have a high caliber panel. I will shortly introduce them with representatives from Swedish industry when we will discuss a number of different issues on gender and minority issues and how successful companies are dealing with these issues. During the roundtable or panel discussion, we will give you who are listening in the opportunity to answer some of your questions. To ask a question, please write in the Q&A box. I would also like to inform you that the event is being recorded and published on our website and social media platforms. So let me introduce this high caliber panel. We have Vivica Hirdman Ryberg, Head of Corporate Communication Sustainability from Investor AB. Maria Hamstedt, Chief Inclusion and Diversity Officer, SEB. Selina Milstam, Head of Global Talent Management, Ericsson. Julie Lynn Teigland, Managing Partner, Europe, Middle East, India, and Africa from EY. And Anna Stenberg, Chief People and Platform Officer from Kinnevik. So all of you, welcome. Let me kick off with a sort of a high level question. Is there a difference between the ownership and management perspective regarding gender and minority issues? Why is the ownership focus on these issues important? Maybe we could start with Vivica, if you could start that question. Then
hello, everyone, and I hope you can hear me now. Can you? Yes. Good. I think, investor being such a large owner, for us, this is really why we engage in diversity and inclusion is very much because we think that diverse perspective, people with different background, different competences, together when they bring different perspectives to the table and take better decisions, i.e. drive better performance in the companies, i.e. drive the long-term competitiveness of the companies. So that's why it's such a critical issue for us as owners.
Okay, anyone else would like to comment? Feel free to just jump in.
I'll be happy to comment as well.
Anna, yes.
I mean, for us, it's always, the tone from the top in terms of ownership, no matter which industry, which sector, is super important in order to really make sure to, get the values, the message out there and really send that signal to the organization. And for us, it's all about making sure that, more diverse organizations, more diverse portfolio companies will really help us grow our businesses faster and better. So for us, it's business critical to have a diverse organization as Kinnevik and also for our portfolio companies. So the tone from the top is super important in terms of ownership. I also want to say that, just 10 years ago, this was more of an HR issue. It was HR driving the diversity discussion in all organizations. And then a couple of years after, it actually became a more strategic topic that entered also into the management team's agendas, which was great. It became a strategic business critical question. And now it has also become an owner topic, which is amazing, because then we get that 360 focus on this, and that's going to make a big difference as well.
Thank you, Anna. Julie, do you like to comment, or you are muted? We don't hear you. No, you are muted. I don't know.
Does it work now?
Now it works. Fine.
Wonderful. Gabrielle, this is such an amazing topic, and I really want to build on what Vivek and Anna said. I run a partnership business globally, and I'm responsible across quite a bit more than Europe. That partnership business means that my partners have an interest in the business as an owner, but we're also working with all industries. And I have to say there's been a huge mindset change over the past 15 years in the concept of diversity. We don't just see it as a nice thing to do or the right thing to do. We see it as a business necessity. And while I know there's lots of arguments out there as to how good the research is, we can show based on our teams that when they're diverse, they reach better results. They work better together and they get better answers. And Gabrielle, maybe something that's really important, they also have more fun. I can say that just being in a group of everybody that looks like you isn't as fun as being with people that are different, even if we have to acknowledge that it's harder. So I think it's something that's impacting the financial results of the owners studies still to be proven, but also wider business needs to acknowledge it gives it that extra pizzazz, that fun, that necessity, and then the economics to back it.
Okay. Selina or Maria, would you like to make any comments on this issue?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you well.
Yes, and I think, I mean, I agree with everything that has been said, but, you know, to add on also the world that we're living in with, you know, the higher complexity and the uncertainty of what is right and the agreement of actually what is right to do today in order to be right tomorrow. And I think just looking at our business being in the banking and banking today and banking tomorrow, I mean, it's getting something totally different. And that's also reasons in how can you actually meet this? And that is by bringing in more perspectives that you might not have already in the company, just to mitigate the things that is coming flying at you, I think, today in the transformation of different parts of the business. Thank you.
Thanks. Selina, do you have any comments on this and how Ericsson looks at this issue?
How Ericsson
versus ownership perspective.
Well, I think my colleague said it very well. But at the end of the day, one of the things that we learned in the past 12 months is actually that change does and can happen overnight if the incentive is big enough, and if those who are in power and, for this audience, holding the money, make the decisions to invest in the ways that the research that has just been highlighted has indicated is the best way to run a business. So,
okay, let's move to the next question. Thank you all. I was a university professor at Columbia in New York in the middle and late 70s in finance, and my female students at that time, I'm quite old, as you can understand, my female students at that time got really the best jobs. So I felt at that time that the US was far ahead of Sweden when it came to sort of gender issues, especially within the financial community. Could we briefly discuss if you see significant cultural differences between the US and Sweden when it comes to the gender issue? I know a lot of things have happened over these last 40 years, not least in Sweden. So who would like to, maybe Julie, you would like to kick off here.
I'd love to kick off. I see major differences. I have to say, I think Sweden has surpassed the US by far on the gender issue. There's much more board representation. There's a true spirit of equality in Sweden that I think the US can only dream of. But I would say it's not just about the gender issue, it's also about looking at inclusion. And there I think we all have progress to make, Gabrielle. So if I look across a big difference, clearly Sweden is way ahead on gender. And I think that's something that as a originally born American, I would say, I don't think we've made the progress that we should have made over the last 40 years. I think Sweden has done very well. I'm not saying there's not more to do, especially in middle management, but I think we've all got to join forces and do something on the inclusivity front. That's how I would leave my comments, Gabrielle.
Anna, do you have a comment on this? We can't hear you.
I agree. But we do definitely have a lot to learn also from the US. For example, if I look at the US companies in Kinnevik's portfolio, they are also ahead of the game and have come a long way in terms of measuring and setting targets for other diversity elements and other dimensions of diversity in terms of ethnicity and so on. And there we have a lot to learn in Sweden and in the Nordic countries. I think we have been a little bit reluctant actually putting measures and defining these other diversity elements because of restrictions and so on. So we have to become more proactive and being more bold in terms of setting those targets and measuring other areas except for gender as well. Of course, gender is easy to measure and it was a good starting point, but we still have a long way to go in terms of the other areas.
Selina, now your camera is off, but how does a really truly global company like Ericsson that are in all kinds of countries all over the world, how do you look at this issue? We somehow lost Selina. I don't know what happened. Let's go to Vivica meanwhile. Please, Vivica, go ahead.
Yeah, I would just like to, I agree with all of you. We are pretty good when it comes to gender. At least we have improved over the past decades. But then it's this issue around inclusion and diversity in a broader sense. I think it's also, we have a very informal structure, an informal way of leadership in Sweden. And sometimes that sort of people feel excluded instead of included because there's car decisions actually taken. How and I think those issues needs to be discussed also in Sweden because it's sort of a hinder when it comes to increasing inclusion.
Vivica, yes, could I just ask you, so I understand you are talking about sort of our leadership style or model that somehow...
Yeah, and I think that it has an impact on also diversity and inclusion in a broader sense. And we need to think about that in order to move ahead also in terms of diversity and inclusion.
Thanks. Anyone who would like to comment? Mia or?
Yes, and I come from another perspective. I'm not sure that most women actually feel that we are better in Sweden in comparison to the US while you're in or working within Sweden. And I think it's part of what you are on also to, Vivica, that you might be in a position, but are you really included? Or are you in the succession for, you know, the next position and so forth? So I'm not really sure that Sweden are so much ahead when it comes to actually including women in comparison to the US.
Okay. How have we lost Selena? Is she not there any longer? Which is very sad because Ericsson is such amazing company. So it's somehow we seem to have lost Selena. I'm sorry for that. We'll see if she can come back. Okay. I have a follow-up question on this. Yeah, Selena doesn't seem to be. Are you there, Selena? No, doesn't. Yeah, but it doesn't seem to be working.
I am back.
Oh, fine. You know, did you hear the conversation? And I mean, Ericsson being such a global company, what's your perspective on US versus Sweden or the rest of the world also? I mean, since you are dealing in all markets.
Yes, well, unfortunately, I think that in Sweden we haven't come as far as we'd like to believe we have come. Having been 15 years, I still see that we're struggling with updating our policies, updating the consequences in our society, and updating culture in general in organizations around that inclusiveness that's necessary, not only for women, but for all minorities across Sweden. So I think when we start to look at the data, we made significant progress in Sweden with those policies in the 70s. And unfortunately, I think we've stagnated, despite having more progressive policies around parental leave. And I think doggies, like the childcare system, is a great example where we've helped women. But I still see that there's those actually, unfortunately, contribute some degree to a glass ceiling that's here.
Okay. I have a follow-up question to this question, and that is, has the focus in Sweden on board representation rather than management careers, I mean, middle management, top management, has that been the right approach to the gender issue? Myself, I always felt that there was a bit too strong focus on board and less on sort of real management careers for women. No one wants to comment on this.
I can comment.
Yeah, Anna, go ahead.
All initiatives, I would say all initiatives that will drive this topic are good. However, I agree with you that it has to be a much bigger focus on the operational levels. How can we get more women into operational roles? Because then we get even more women in the talent pool for the board roles, which is of course also important. However, I think in general, when it comes to the debate, I think the biggest focus has been on why this is important rather than talking about how. And when you talk about the operational roles, it automatically becomes more natural to talk about how to improve diversity. So we have to become even more concrete. We have to become much more solution oriented when we talk about diversity, and really look into how we can inject D&I into the work streams, into our processes, because then we will actually get D&I, part of the company cultures and part of our leadership. So I think focusing even more on the operational role will also help us solve that.
Gabrielle, can I build on what Anna said? I thought she spoke extremely well. A great comment, Anna, and I agree. I think what people thought is we hire enough diversity in the early stages of most companies, actually, when we look across. There are a few exceptions, but most companies. And if we can do the board at the top, we make like a sandwich and we can work ourselves down. The problem is I agree with you, Anna. I think they forgot the how in the middle. And when we look at the middle, it takes quite a while to make sure that women have the right P&L responsibility type roles, not the easy roles, but the hard roles. And it's harder and takes longer to get them positioned in that. Gabrielle, I think they somehow forgot that piece in the middle. And if you look now, I think both in the US and in Sweden, that's where we can do more. And frankly, across the globe, that's where we need to do more to make sure that women are not just growing in their careers, that's obvious, but growing also into different parts of the business that give them different experiences to better qualify them. In a way, the focus on boards was almost the easy part, right? It's easy to find women towards the end of their career that have had a fantastic career because they've worked through it. There are a lot of them, but it's hard to get the level of critical mass you need to be represented in middle management who are willing to do that tough P&L responsible role, who are there. They need to be developed and they need to be invested in. And I think people understand that now. I don't think it's possible to flip a switch and get it overnight. And I think later we'll be talking about, hopefully I can learn something from this great panel as to what each of you are doing in that respect.
Okay, anyone else would like to comment?
I can just add to that, because as owners, about a year ago, we set targets on diversity and inclusion, and we did that also with a gender perspective, and then we for equal from a portfolio perspective have equal representation on the boards. But we also set targets on the management level. And why did we do that as owners? Because otherwise it's quite natural we target the board. But we did that in order to really drive change and in order to send that strong signal to all the companies that we have an engagement in. So going back to what all of us are saying, it's both the board level and the operational level. And we as owners, we can also drive that change on the operational level.
Okay. I have a question from the audience. Maybe we can sort of take in between here. And the question is as follows. In order to increase the pool of talent, we need to make the market, I suppose the commercial world is what's meaning, more interesting to young women and other minorities in school. How can we achieve that, or can we achieve that? This is a long-term question. I don't know if you have any comments or agree with the questionnaire.
Well, Gabriel,
please go ahead, whoever wants.
Yeah,
Yes.
This is Selena. I think that this is a really important focus area for Ericsson, creating an open talent market where there's an experience of fairness and transparency, where we talk a lot about creating that psychological and social safety where people can speak up, where we're not just talking about inclusion or talking about being passionate about diversity, but we're actually changing policies. We're actually implementing ways of working that are inclusive and not alienating any part of the population that is a talent for for us of future potential talent. And I think that that's, you know, we talk a lot about allyship and men and their allyship, but it's really allyship for all of the talent and creating that fairness and opportunity for everyone. And I think that particularly the awareness that's being heightened in young people in university. I mean, they're choosing universities by those same selection processes. So they're certainly going to be choosing organizations. And again, as the pandemic has taught us, we have an opportunity to leapfrog ourselves and create a new paradigm of work, a workplace, and the flexibility that enables much greater diversity and much more inclusion of anybody who is willing to work hard and is smart and wants to contribute to an organization.
Anyone else would like to comment?
I can just comment as well on the talent pool, because we tend to kind of use the argument that the talent pool is narrow. We have to, you know, educate more women into specific sectors and so on. But the talents are already out there. It's our own networks that have to be broadened. We have to, you know, go beyond those traditional networks where we usually source talents from on board level, on operational level, and so on. So we have to just stop using that argument that the talents aren't there. I mean, it definitely goes for board recruitments. You can never use the argument that there aren't enough women with enough experience for a certain board role. We saw that so clearly when we were setting targets for our investment team, improving diversity there. It didn't take long until we really reached, you know, our targets of 40-60 balance between men and women on both investment team level, but also management team and board level. So if you just set the targets and really expand your talent pool, there are no excuses and you will be able to succeed.
Anyone
Gabrielle?
else? Yes, Julie.
Can I add a different perspective? So I agree. And
Sure.
I think Mia wants to get in here too, if I saw her.
Yeah, but I do that after you. So
Okay. I just
Yes.
saw you reach and I was thinking,
Yeah.
I fully agree with what Selena and Anna said. And at the same time, I'm going to take a completely different perspective for just a second. At EY, we're doing a lot around technology. I really think there's an opportunity to get a lot more women across the base in technology. And I'm not referring to, because I completely agree with Anna, I'm not referring to the already educated talent pool. I'm referring to motivating young girls ages 11 to 16 to really get excited about the fact that they can do things in that space, whether it's an AI or blockchain or coding, or I don't care, but I would like to see more girls, especially young girls across many of our markets, be willing to give it a try. And I know we say that, you know, everything is gender neutral, but when you're in school, it's actually not. And so I really want to be cognizant of the fact, I think in some markets, we need to find a way to inspire a few. And I'm not specific to any industry, but at least across some of those STEM areas, I think there's more that we can do to get them excited about that. And I know, Selena, that's probably, you know, 2 generations before they try to join Ericsson or join EY. But I think we all have a role to play about being role models, showing that, you know, it's great to see senior women like us in that field. We can do it, and we've got to encourage our young girls to keep doing that. Technology will be more and more important in the future, which is why I said I don't care which industry it's in, but getting them those skills, I think, Gabrielle, is really important. And I think all of us, whether we're an owner business or what industry we have, we should be looking to inspire that future generation in some way.
Maria, you wanted to comment on this.
Yeah, and I was into the same as you, Julie, that, you know, also to use the power that we have within the company that we are in, and how can we make it attractive to people in the younger ages also to stay, because at least in Sweden, we can see that, for instance, you know, women that graduate within the tech sector or the tech areas is also reducing. So I think we do have an important part to make us attractive and to do that early on. And we can do that. And that is also building the pool for our next generations to come to actually put some efforts in that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Can I just very briefly, very briefly comment? I think we should not end up in that it's a sort of a girl's problem or a women problem. It's so it's both sexes. We have to work with the men, the perception of men in terms of what are their unconscious biases, what are the women's unconscious biases. It's not, let's not sort of again fall in the trap of, well, we need to role model the women, we need to teach them, we need to say them, this is the track you should take. Instead, confirm and acknowledge the women and all the capabilities we have, and educate the men and train the men much more.
Viveka, could I ask maybe a bit provocative question? If I look of the people, I don't know exactly how many are attending now, but there were 430 people that said they were going to attend. More than 80% were women and less than 20% are men. I mean, that to me seems pretty provocative. It should be the other way around to my, or at least 50-50. Why is it that, and I actually checked with my male colleagues, in Swedish business life, I asked a few questions. It seems that whenever there is a seminar or something around, and it has the, within it, the title gender, they sort of, no, that's not for me. If we said how to develop human capital in company or something like that, they would attend. I don't know if you have any comment on this, because it really relates to what you have discussed.
I think we also have to make this whole discussion much more inclusive, just as we want to create a more inclusive business environment. And I think also there is a feeling out there that it is a little bit of a sensitive topic. And if you don't have all the answers, if you're afraid of falling into a trap when you discuss this topic, then you prefer not to kind of stay out of it. So I think we have to, again, be more kind of inclusive there and more solution and positive and opportunity driven when we talk about the gender situation, rather than just talking about the hinders and the problems and, pointing finger at the companies who are not succeeding. Let's see how we can, solve this together. And it's like also from an ownership perspective, for us at Kinnevik, it's super important not just to come with a lot of restrictions and requirements to our portfolio companies. We want to also help them with the solutions and work this out together with them in a more welcoming and proactive way. And I think by doing that and having that approach to this whole discussion, we will be more, it will be easier to attract more men into this discussion as well.
Anyone else would like to comment?
Well, I would just say, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Selena, go ahead, please.
Yes. Social anthropologist Margaret Mead, she said that words build worlds. And I think the language that we use around this topic are important. And I do think that similar to what Anna said in terms of having an appreciative lens, if we use data, if we use research, use behavioral science, and we engage in conversations around creating organizations that are more productive, more effective, creating greater return for investors and creating greater impact to society in general, then diversity and inclusion are at the heart of that, since if we're agreeing that the research is correct around how it influences creativity and innovation. And I think all of these things are different taboo topics that we need to get up. So creating, again, that psychological safety in the organizations where we can talk about differences for men and women, just like we can talk about differences in mental health or physical capability or menstrual health issues, all the issues that tend to be taboo in organizations, and talk about them in a more scientific and data-based way, then I think we have the opportunity to take big strides forward in a short period of time.
Could I take another issue, which is also, I think, from a Swedish point of view, very important and should be a main issue for us. Today, 25% of the Swedish population are either not born in Sweden or have non-Swedish parents. Should the minority diversity, I mean, have they had too strong focus on gender and less on sort of general minority diversity? And what can we learn from the US? It's a very different culture, very different history, etc., etc. But I would like to hear your comments on this. I mean, I think this is a main issue going forward, is the sort of general minority issue, not disregarding the gender issue, but I mean, there are other minority issues, especially in a country like Sweden, which has now changed tremendously over the last 30, 40 years. Who would like to kick off?
Maybe I could start. Yeah, if you allow me. I do think it's a challenge. I think we need to be embracing every kind of diversity and inclusion. And yes, minority backgrounds are exactly that. I think this is harder culturally, and we should admit it. But I have to tell you, if we looked back 100 years ago, they would have said the same about the women, and we've gotten over that hump. This is something we need to address, and we need to put plans in place. It goes into the point that we raised in the very beginning of this call about being inclusive. And I pick up on the comment that Selena made, embracing our differences as a way to drive advantage, competitive advantage from a team perspective, but also from an overall company perspective. And I think that's going to require quite a bit of new thinking on this topic, and us being willing to step over those unconscious biases of the past.
Anyone else? Comment on the sort of minority diversity issue?
Yeah, I fully agree. I fully agree. And this is also, of course, again, a business opportunity that Sweden really hasn't capitalized on yet. We have started doing it from a gender perspective, but the next step is really to define those diversity dimensions that we can also start setting targets on. And as I said before, we have been a bit reluctant doing that because it's a different, cultural, we come from a different cultural perspective in terms of measuring these areas, but we have to take those steps. And I think what's also important is that we have to also prepare the leaders in our organizations for leading diverse teams. It's a completely different thing. You need different kind of skill sets in order to lead individuals with different perspectives, different backgrounds. But if we have leaders with the right skills of doing that, we can really, unleash the full potential of these teams. But that is also something that I think is very important as we go forward. It's not just about recruiting and building diverse teams. It's also about really unleashing the potential of those teams, which is not always as easy if you have led very, homogenic teams all the time.
Maria, you wanted to comment, I think.
Yeah, and I think for one thing, I mean, as we talked in the beginning, to be part of, to be a big employer in a society, and what can we actually do to help a society to be stable over time and so forth. So from that perspective, it's also important for us as a company, but I think also from the perspective that what we see now is that many competencies that we need specifically within our areas, they are fairly young, and they can't be found, for instance, in Sweden, or there are very few in the world. So that also makes us we need to embrace people from different backgrounds, different countries, and so forth. Whether we measure it or not, we have some possibilities, at least, to measure what we stand towards the 25%, but not going, by the race or so forth. But I think we are forced to do that if we want to be a successful company forward.
And I think, to add to that, as leaders in organizations, sometimes I think we get preoccupied with having to have all the answers. Something that Ericsson is learning a lot is a long history of employee resource groups that we've had in the US for a long time. And how do we, transfer that to a more global level? We're 100,000 employees in over 140 countries. And what is the different group within that respective geography that needs support? And what we've seen is if we're tapping into the collective intelligence of our employees, and giving them, small budgets and autonomy and authority to make decisions and come to leadership with recommendations. And if we actually listen to them about how to make it a more inclusive workplace, then we come also, again, farther, faster by just really, using our incredible talent and the intelligence that we have in our organization, instead of trying to figure it all out at the center and thinking that we have all the answers. So I think really depending on the employees and the people that we're working with to actually come up with their own recommendations to represent them is a good way that we're experimenting with at Ericsson.
I have several questions from the audience that I'm trying to summarize. It touches upon this, and it touches upon, I think, an issue that Anna raised earlier. The question really follows: when you manage sort of gender and minority diversity, should you use sort of a KPI system within, to measure? Because we learned whatever gets measured gets done, etc. How do you look at this, and how do you manage it? Anna, maybe you can start, because I think Kinnevik is doing a bit of this. So.
Yeah, sure. Yes, we measure everything. We measure everything, both for Kinnevik, but also for our portfolio companies, and so that we can track progress, see, where do we have gaps and how can we improve. And I think one measure, one KPI that is really good to always look at is turnover, staff turnover, but not the usual staff turnover measurement, more looking into, staff turnover among women on certain levels in the organization or in other areas, because then you are able to detect, maybe there are in one department or on one level when women are just reaching a certain seniority level. If they start to drop off and leave the company there, then you can quickly define and detect that you maybe have a leadership issue or a cultural problem. So I think looking into staff turnover and breaking that down into different diversity dimensions and on levels really, really helps. So that's one
you touched upon that in Sweden, it's sometimes a bit sensitive sort of to measure certain things, while in the US, if we take that as an example, they have a very different sort of view and culture and background, the history, where they measure, race, religion, all kinds of things that we, in Sweden would be very difficult to talk about. I don't know if you have a comment on that or anyone else.
I think it would be very difficult in a Swedish context to start putting metrics on sexual orientation or race or and so on. And it's a very difficult road to take in a Swedish context. And I think it's important to highlight the differences in the history and the culture between the US and, for example, Sweden or Northern Europe. But then, of course, it goes back to the question of leadership. How do you lead? How do you include different perspectives? What are your own biases or unconscious biases? But to start putting metrics on people in that way, I think that's a difficult road to take in a Swedish context.
Okay, we are getting to the sort of, we're at the end of our time. So I'm going to end this with a final question, where I'm going to ask each one of you to highlight either one question you think should be discussed at a conference like this one, and why it should be discussed, and that we haven't discussed. Or you could also give an example from your own company how you deal with this issue. So please feel free and sort of make a final statement that you would like the audience to get to know. So maybe we start with Viveka, since you are on the left side from me, I see you. So,
okay. No, I really want to highlight the importance of promoting different perspectives, different experiences, different competences. And really this, the different mindset, because that is a business issue. It drives the long-term competitiveness. And then we have to find ways of doing that. One way we do it is by measuring sense of belonging, sense of inclusion among our own employees. And we urge our companies to do the same, to really drive diversity and inclusion.
Maria? We don't hear you.
Now you hear me?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, and I think at least what we can see, how can you actually drive change? Because at least I see this as a culture change. That is a big part of it. And looking at, how fast change we have seen in some areas in elections and so forth. But I think it used to be the carrot and the stick. Now we can see that it's actually moving to make it easy versus hard. And if you can make it effortless for people to do the right thing, I think you can also have progress that is a bit faster. So that's my
Thank you.
loss. Yes.
Selena, some final words?
Sure. I mean, I think some of this I've said before, but I think, somebody touched on unconscious bias, and we spend a lot of time training people on conscious bias. But what we really know, what actually works now from the science, is that we need to de-bias the organizations. We need to de-bias our processes, our ways of working, and fundamentally how we're assessing people. So if we're getting at those policies and governance models, that's a key piece. If we talked about setting goals, but if there are goals with no consequences and no accountability held, then they're meaningless. So the power of having those KPIs with actual consequences. And then finally, this is a culture issue, right? So if we're not actually addressing the behavioral science, looking at the data, looking at the correlation between the data and what's really happening, instead of making assumptions about why some group is leaving or staying, then we're actually missing the mark, and we're interjecting solutions that are not solving the true problem. So I think it is about debiasing organizations and really making sure that as we're role modeling and thinking about representation, there's a quote by, I think it's a woman who's the founder of the Children's Defense Fund. She said, "You can't be what you can't see." So I would wrap up saying that I love the passion on the board, and I appreciate your passion in terms of facilitating, but it's action that yields results for most things, and definitely in this space.
Absolutely agree. Julie, please.
Such great comments from everyone. I would maybe leave you with 3 thoughts if I could. Please don't think that diversity and inclusiveness is that nice soft topic. It's really critical for performance. Number 2, I think it's something that everyone has a part to play. This is not just tone at the top from the CEO, but everyone, when we hire someone, when we work in a team, when we promote someone, has a role to play to making sure that we're making sure everyone feels like they belong and everybody has a spot, whether you can measure it or not. Now, I do encourage the measurement for that, what we can see and what we're legally allowed to. And I agree with Vivek, that's not everything. But I think we've got to move in that direction about taking accountability, responsibility for action on the things that we can. But I'd leave you with my 3rd thought. I know that 80% of this might be by women, but I do hope that by seeing the passion and the energy, we can inspire a few men and women out there to take the action needed to have an impact. So Gabrielle, thank you very much for all of your great moderation and facilitation. And
thank you.
Thanks
Anna.
to the great panelists.
Thanks. Anna, please, you end this sort of.
Okay. Well, one question that I sometimes miss in seminars like this is, how do you inject D&I in a concrete way into your behaviors, into your work streams, and into your processes of the organization? Because in order to answer that question, you have to become very concrete in what you actually do. And for us, it has been important, for example, to scrutinize each and every process that we have in the organization. And our investment process is the heart of what we do at Kinnevik. So when we scrutinize that process, we understood and realized, that we can have such a big impact from a D&I perspective if we set clear targets on the share of how big percentage of our capital that should be invested in female founders. If we don't invest or do follow-ons in companies that don't have a very proactive and clear D&I agenda, that is also a great way of having an impact on the society and on the companies that we invest in. So by really, really working on our investment process and doing a very detailed people and cultural and D&I due diligence on the companies that we evaluate, that also changes the behaviors of the employees in our organization, which also affects our DNA as a company. And that's how we can change long term.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. We are now almost 4:15. I would first of all like to thank the outstanding panel and the activity, and it's really been most interesting, and I really appreciate having chaired this with this great group of people answering and discussing. So thanks a lot to the panel. It's been, at least for me, very valuable, and I hope the audience feel the same. I also would like to say to the audience that we have received many, many questions that we unfortunately don't have the time to answer. So, excuse us for that, but it's just a shortage of time. Hopefully this will be followed by other webinars or seminars. So thanks a lot. Take care, and let's work on these issues. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.